Yes, that's right, Sharon. This latest embarrassment and setback for An Taoiseach happened yesterday evening.
Well, the people couldn't have been more clear. They've absolutely thrown out the proposals you put to them. You got this wrong, and you got it wrong on a grand scale, didn't you?
Yes. The first thing they have to do is eat a nice portion of humble pie, and you saw it from Taoiseach Leo Varadkar there.
Recognition of care without any rights, and when family members were trying to communicate with you, you were closing them down, and your CEO wrote a letter to the editor talking about rights being rhetoric, and that we had to be a bit, we had to understand that it was an operational capacity. Now that is not advocating for rights, and actually I would go so far as to say Family Carers Ireland and National Women's Council of Ireland need to take a good long look at yourselves and actually think, what does the future look like for you?
Catherine, coming and standing with me here in Dublin Castle. We're going to take a break. Join us in a few moments.
Thank you both very much for coming and standing with me here in Dublin.
Sásta leis bhachtíocht, a bheith ag intucht, a bhaint leis bhachtíocht, I gás amháin, agus a gás eile, tá mé hapú gur Dredíach na renta pobl leis molla bhí dionta ag na party realtas.
And I think there is a damning verdict here from the public on the government and the way they've been handling a whole range of issues in recent years. There's been a secretive approach to the wordings on these referenda. It was rushed through, minimising scrutiny by the Oireachtas, and I actually think that the government parties should really come under pressure to fundraise to pay back the nearly 20 million of taxpayers' money that they used and funneled towards a campaign that they refused to allow to be properly debated. The number of people I met yesterday in Finglas of different ages saying, my mother matters. There was something really that got in the nose of the people, and I think this is where the gender ideology thing really got in the way of the government's ability to serve the people. Because in the end, people have no problem honouring families of all forms, but people do believe that marriage has a value, and you never hear the government talking about that. And I wonder, will they now get the message and say, actually, what do we need to do to promote marriage for its value in society, in addition to promoting others? The same with mothers. Why did they have to get rid of the word mother from the Constitution? Because it's ideology, it's gender ideology that they didn't want to talk about. But the reality is that they could have given something good to carers, but why did they make it a condition that you had to get rid of mother? So I think a lot of people are fed up now of being told by the government and the wider establishment. I think people will see this as the worst of our politics, that at the last minute there would have been an attempt to leak the Attorney General's advice in order to sway the referendum. That kind of tricksterism is exactly what has people so frustrated, not just with the government, but Sinn Féin, all of the parties. They didn't represent ordinary people. Their value that they place on marriage, the value that they place on motherhood. We have to put up with this politically correct stuff all the time. And they have got their answer today, the government, but I've already heard people, in the opposition as well as in government, trying to say, it was all about confusion, or, it was because we didn't get the wording right. They didn't get the wording right on carers, that's for sure. But when we hear them talking about, are they now going to start listening about, actually, does marriage have a value we need to promote? Is there a special honour that's due to mothers, and couldn't we also have something for fathers and parents in the Constitution? They were not open to any discussion of that. They rushed the thing through so arrogantly, and that arrogance is getting to the electorate. All sorts of stuff coming at us that's ideological, from the hate speech legislation, gender ideology being pushed in school, surrogacy legislation is going to be very controversial. They're not interested in having close scrutiny in the Dáil Channel. There is an arrogance of power here that's got its pushback today. I hope the government and Sinn Féin and the main parties will start listening. But fair play to Aon too, and the Independents and the Maria Steens and the Countess and all those who led from the front.
These are not the first referendums to be lost, and indeed are not. But I mean, it's incumbent, if you're in a government and you're putting a referendum to the people, to do might and main to win it. And I don't think it's a reasonable excuse to say, well, referendums are lost and life sort of goes on. You would have to ask, have the lessons been learned from previous referendums, where, as we said earlier, certainty is really crucial. People need to know what they're voting about, and we heard in the talk with the people from the carers groups earlier on that there was mass confusion, and in that context, people who are not sure about changing the constitution won't do it. because they haven't been persuaded to by the government parties. And I mean, Thomas Byrne was he was director of elections for Fianna Fáil, so again he has taken the blame, as the Taoiseach has. But really, I think it's a bit odd to be saying we learned the lessons after the referendum has been lost. You need to learn these lessons prior, so you don't lose the referendum.
Get troubles, Sharon. I think the government approached this as a box-ticking exercise and ended up opening a Pandora's box, essentially. And they're now on results day, in shock, trying to unpack all of that. And you'd have to say that, like Thomas was the director of elections for Fianna Fáil, you could say in some parts did more harm than good.
We have a very large no vote today, much smaller turnout.
At the end of the day, though, the two referendums you and all the other political parties supported, bar Aontú, has been heavily defeated by the people of Ireland.
Lín na vótaí I bhábha an tugra, Ceracade is a Huchtó Shock Mila, Cuacade is a Shaska Cahar. Votes in favour of the proposal, 487,564. Lín na vótaí I gcuine an tugra, 1,051,000. I'll just start again. 1,051,000. Cuacade is the Dacha de Shay. Votes against the proposal, 1,021,546. More of na vótaí I gcuine an tugra, Cuacade is a Trucad 3,000, Nígéid is a Huchtó Dó. Majority of votes against the proposal, 533,982. Begnatorhi o Gokdal counter foil Aridalengalua. Details of the referendum results in all constituencies will be available online shortly. Thank you.
But not persuasive enough for people to support.
Will be looked of this term decision for will government.
I know the people have spoken, I've acknowledged that. But why would you say you'd redone it? That's spitting in the face of the people of Ireland. I haven't.
The caring and carers are so central to Irish life. The rights of
all of the blame for the confusion must lie with the government. I mean, for instance, the Electoral Commission was rushed into preparing their documentation. I didn't think much of their leaflet, to be honest with you, because most people who read it at the end of it still didn't have a clue.
It's my disappointment with the government, what they have done. They used propaganda to push through two changes to our constitution in a manner that was patronising and patriarchal, and that women's group joined in and used that type of language is very, very upsetting for me.
The courtyard in Dublin Castle has been packed with people when recent referenda changed the constitution, but it was quieter today as the Irish public voted to keep the status quo. For those who campaigned for a no, there was delight that the electorate had listened to their concerns.
I know there's lots of reasons why people voted no, but I feel that we were heard, and it's an important day for Irish society, and I think it's a paradigm shift in terms of how society wants to be made up and how the people of Ireland are saying if we are going to have a constitutional change, we have to make sure that everybody is in it on an equal basis.
Motherhood, the concept that should be enshrined in law, and that the constitutional rights that reside in 41.2 should remain. I feel like this was a very misleading campaign that was fought by government.
Won't rerun this referendum. The Sinn Féin leader said her party and government would consider a future referendum on the language surrounding women in the constitution. But a small group of protesters at Dublin Castle made clear their views on that prospect.
The Irish people said no really loud.
defeat for the government. It wasn't what they intended. A stunning victory for the no side, and it's pretty clear that the government was blindsided by this. I was talking to some politicians on the government benches last night. They saw the surge in late voting. They felt that the movement of the electorate was towards them, when in actual fact, now we can see today on Saturday, it was going the other way. It's pretty clear that the campaign did not work. It did not chime with the electorate, that the government did not go out and make its message clear. Indeed, confusion seemed to reign, and on that basis it has fallen, and it has fallen substantially. The propositions are going down. The consequences that flow from that, Ray, are unclear, whether that bleeds into the general body politics, or this is just a one-day wonder.
I think what we're about to witness in the next hour or so here, when the first result is declared, is a far harsher blow than that. Confirmation of two big defeats will really be something of a clobbering in Dublin Castle for this government. The ministers and government representatives who turned up here today, and it's fair to say they've been few and far between, are trying to brush off the overall political significance of this. The Taoiseach pointing to 13 previous referendums that he says were defeated without a real knock-on effect for the government at the time electorally. And Roderick O'Gorman, when he was here, he said, look, the government has to look at what went wrong, but he did say that issues were raised in the campaign that had incorrect interpretations. So this is an embarrassment, no doubt about that, for government representatives here today. They are facing into an electoral cycle now with a headwind against them, particularly in parts of rural Ireland where the defeat in the family referendum looks like being 3-1 in some cases. No great comfort for the opposition here today either. Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald arrived, and she was placing the blame firmly at the door of the government, saying they had a solo run on the questioning of this. But there is no escaping the fact for her that this referendum, or both of them, have been defeated in places that would be considered her party's stronghold. And I think the question for many opposition representatives, bar Aontú, who were the lone voices cheering here in Dublin Castle today, is how they found themselves so far off on the wrong side of the electorate. And that's something that is creating not just disappointment within the political establishment, but some nervousness too.
Undoubtedly the case that political judgment is going to be brought into question. It's clear they felt it was a complicated issue, but they took a strategic decision, not to have any accompanying legislation which might have clarified for the electorate just exactly what they meant, just exactly what the ramifications were going to be. And the campaign was lacklustre, at times non-existent. They weren't out there selling. And I think Mary's right to touch on the opposition parties, Sinn Féin, Labour Party, Social Democrats, People Before Profit, who are also advocating, saying they weren't particularly happy, but they were advocating for a yes vote. Maybe they should have said this wasn't good enough. So I think on both sides, government and opposition, this question to answer, but usually I think it's the case that what happens in a referendum does not have substantial consequences when an election comes, but we're going to find out pretty quickly in June when we've got local European elections and also another referendum.
Yes, and an overwhelming rejection of the government's proposed amendment. Cork South Central is the home constituency of three of the most senior ministers in this cabinet, Micheál Martin, Michael McGrath and Simon Coveney. And here the family referendum was rejected, 61% no and 39% yes, and I think that tells you all you need to know about the result of this referendum, and it looks as if it's going to be that way in the Care referendum too.
In Galway, but we know it's a no, and they've just a few minutes ago started counting in the second referendum, the Care referendum, and it's a similar story in Donegal and in Cavan Monaghan. Donegal finished counting about an hour ago. Again, they're waiting from the nod from Dublin to carry on. Now, the other four constituencies in Connacht Ulster, we have results, and they're all very similar. Galway East, turnout almost 41%, just over 72% voting no. Roscommon Galway, turnout almost 44%, 74% voted no, 26% voted yes. Sligo Leitrim, the turnout was almost 43%, 72% voting no, and just over
over 28% voting yes. And finally, Mayo, the turnout there again, just over 43%, 75.55 voting no, and 24.45% voting yes.
Tally men and tally women were telling us from very early on that it was looking like a no-no. Politicians arrived here from very early on, the likes of Michael McDowell, Ivana Bacik, Eamon Ryan, and all predicting that it would be this no-no, and so it did come to pass. However, it should be said that the first Dublin result to come in was for Dún Laoghaire, and it bucked the trend. One of the only yeses we've had so far, coming in by the tightest of margins, yes, at 50.3% in the family referendum, but that was quickly followed by the likes of Dublin Midwest, a resounding no, 71%. Dublin West, the constituency of the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, 63% no. Dublin Central, the constituency of Mary Lou MacDonald, 58% no. The aforementioned Ivana Bacik and Eamon Ryan, their constituency of Dublin Bay South, it was a no, but by the tiniest of margins, 50.4%. So as I said, the tally men, the tally women, and the politicians predicting this no-no very early on today. Several hours later, it appears it's going to come to pass.
Right, at count centres across the Leinster region outside Dublin today, low public interest and few, if any, tally people in centres. With the family referendum result announced now in all 10 constituencies so far, it's been a resounding no, averaging around 67.6% across the region. Louth was the last constituency in this region to be announced with a no vote of 71.17%. Local Labour councillor Emma Cutcliffe said the government will now have a lot of questions to answer. The family referendum in this constituency was defeated with a 70.7% of the vote, while the returning officer here indicated the care referendum would also be defeated. In Laois Offaly, the family referendum was defeated with 75.71% of the vote. Green Party Senator Pippa Hackett said a no-no vote would be disappointing for government, but that this is a democracy in action and there will be certain things to reflect on afterwards. A no result has also been announced for Kildare North and South, Wexford, Wicklow, Longford Westmeath, Meath East and West. No results have been announced yet in the care referendum, but all the indications are there that a no result will be returned in all 10 constituencies later.
Great day for Irish democracy, to be honest. I think it's the people versus the political establishment, and the people won. I think the country has dodged a bullet in terms of these referendums. It's very clear to me that it would have sowed enormous confusion within the court system. We would have had hundreds, if not thousands, of people traipsing through the courts at massive cost to themselves, trying to achieve their rights. And also there was a material reduction in the level of support that would be given to people who are carers or who are in need of care. And I think the major message for me is that we have a political establishment that is not listening to the people. That, you know, it is an incredible groupthink and herd mentality within Leinster House at the moment, and that's a real problem for politics. And even the establishment political parties, you know, we see that the leadership of Sinn Féin and the Labour Party are marooned currently in a number of different issues away from their supporters, and that's a very dangerous place to be.
But what's to celebrate? Because nothing will have changed if these two amendments, which it looks like are going to be rejected. So it means what was there before, which some people said were useless, they didn't stand up in court and they didn't offer protection to people. So what's to celebrate?
Well, on the first basis there, the carers amendment would have actually changed the article within the Constitution that actually has provided a material benefit to mothers within the home. So, you know, the Murphy case in 1980 prevented an income tax law which would have been damaging to families. The 1992 L versus L case would have had a benefit in terms of maintenance and alimony, and that would have been damaged as well. And actually there's a court case live at the moment where a mother of a person who has a severe disability is hanging her case on this particular article to achieve proper carers allowance. The government, like so many other people, is fighting these individuals who are simply looking for help in terms of care.
But it doesn't change the fact that day in, day out, mothers do go to work, and nothing in this clause prevents them from having to do that, because that's the society we live in.
And that's the key point here. So in many ways, the government's amendments were a empty, hollow husk of virtue signalling. They were providing no major difference to people. Now what the government needs to do is actually provide the bread and butter supports that so many people want. And that is the disconnect that exists between the political establishment and the people. The government is happy to talk about these very expensive referendums that actually provide nothing for anybody, but people actually want real supports in terms of more home help hours, in terms of, you know, childcare facilities.
But does the Constitution need to change for that to happen?
The will of the government is the key ingredients there. And I want to just one other key point I think coming out of today is important, in that in the run-up to this referendum, we had the government and Minister Roger O'Gorman, when asked repeatedly in the Dáil and in the media, had he received any firm legal advice from the state that would give the view that this wasn't going to create confusion in the courts and wouldn't lead to significant litigation. He confirmed that. He says he has received no advice. But we've seen a leaking of the Attorney General's advice, which actually states specifically that durable relationships would cause confusion in the courts and it would lead to litigation in the future.
I don't think confusion was the word.
Well, it would say the court, there was no certainty how the courts would decide on what durable relationships meant. And that's exactly the point Aoin 2 was making. But the minister was misleading the people, and misleading the people before a referendum is a very serious issue.
There was other misleading or mistruths, you could say. Like, there were some no campaigners. There was a poster up that said, "Don't force mothers out to work, vote no." That was criticised by the Electoral Commission because they said that it was an incorrect representation of what this was all about.
Yeah, like, that wasn't an Aoin 2 poster, I have to say that, so I can't speak for it.
But do you accept that there were some mistruths by no campaigners?
Well, I accept that the fact that the government created particular amendments that were so confusing that actually it was impossible for people to understand and actually led to a situation where all of these situations arose. But the key point here is the government have a responsibility in terms of misleading the people before the referendum. I personally think that the position of Roger O'Gorman is untenable at this moment in time, and I think he needs to come out and answer questions of why he was given information by the most senior legal advisor to the government that he refuted he received, and every time he was asked in the Dáil and in the media.
What do you mean it's untenable? Do you think he should leave his position?
Absolutely. A constitution is one of the most important things that happens within a democracy, and we had a minister who purposefully misled the Irish people in relation to the senior advice that he was getting, and I don't think his position is tenable.
Can I just ask you, though, what would you say to families out there, single parents, quasi-families, as Michael McDougall called them earlier on, who after today still aren't recognised as a family unit?
Well, I think it's really important that people, single-parent families and cohabitating families, don't see this as a no to them. This isn't. This is a no to government incompetency, is what it is. In actual fact, most of those families, when I meet them in my constituency, they actually want to get real bread and butter material help. They don't want the virtue signalling, empty, meaningless amendments that these governments are providing. In my own constituency, most parents are getting up at 6:30 in the morning, they're commuting an hour and a half, they're dropping their kids off at a creche, they're working a 9-hour day, and they're doing it in reverse. They're saying to me that they're being forced by this government's policies in terms of rents and mortgages to actually be on this economic treadmill when many of them would love to spend, the first year or two in their kids' lives at home helping them. But they can't, because this government is happier to deal with this sort of marketing rather than real provision of help to families.
Okay.
Our failure to convince a majority of people to vote yes. I think we were unsuccessful in convincing people that we needed these referendums at all, and then of course had huge difficulties convincing people about the detail of the proposition proposed. So this is something that we're going to have to reflect on and I consider what the next steps are.
Why, as has been the constant criticism during this, did you make it so complicated? That was the recommendation brought to you by committees, by citizens' assemblies, and then suddenly words like this started coming in and striving, and that confused people and annoyed them.
That was an example, I suppose, of where we listened to the Citizens' Assembly and we got the result that we did, and not sure we would have won the referendum either.
Tom Clonan, who was one of the leading figures in this campaign, said this referendum was toxic to them, and that it opened up a Pandora's box in terms of how they feel they are being let down by the state. What is your commitment to them tonight?
Well, I think we have to listen to that and hear it and internalise it. We want to press ahead as a government with some of the things that we can do in terms of gender equality.
There's no glossing over the damage and the difficult day that this has been for the coalition. They now face into an electoral cycle with a headwind against them, wondering how they failed to sell and communicate effectively a message to the electorate, an electorate that it now appears to be remote from. There's no great comfort for any opposition party here either. Aoin 2, the only Dáil party in favour of no votes. Labour and Sinn Féin here today trying to lay the blame squarely at the door of government. The Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou McDonald said the coalition went on a solo run in relation to the wording here. But for her party, this is difficult too, because there are areas and cohorts of the electorate considered Sinn Féin strongholds who would also have voted resounding noes. This is a real clobbering for the coalition at Dublin Castle as the lights turn out here tonight, contemplating what went wrong and what this all means.
Do you regret comments that you made during the campaign about families and the state and who was responsible?
That's, I suppose, a good example of the kind of misinformation and disinformation we talk about, and I'm sorry those things happen in campaigns, but I think we should stand up to them, not apologise for them.
Okay, there's been an accusation about misinformation and disinformation towards the end of the campaign, in particular the Attorney General's advice suddenly being leaked out, and him raising questions about what was taking place and the words that were being used in this referendum, and also calls for Roderick O'Gorman, who was in charge of the campaign, to stand down, that his position is not tenable. What's your response to both of those issues?
This isn't the first time that a government has lost a referendum. It's actually the 13th time, and I'm not aware.
This is one of the biggest. If you don't believe on the scale of this, there are questions for senior political figures, including yourself and your political judgment, in this referendums and how they were carried out.
I think there certainly are, and that's something that we have to reflect on. As I said earlier on, we're accepting, and I as head of government am accepting responsibility for this defeat. We're not trying to put it on anyone else. It was our duty to convince people that these changes were necessary and beneficial. We failed to do so, and of course we need to reflect on that.
Okay, people talked about archaic and sexist language, and one of the issues was to try and get it out of the Constitution. But here we are tonight, and emphatically what we now have in our Constitution, and some people say this has never been honoured, by the way. The state shall therefore endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged, by economic necessity, to engage in labour, to the neglect of their duties in the home. I'm quoting directly. This has been emphatically left in the Constitution. Do you intend to honour it in greater fashion than hitherto it has been?
Well, it is the courts that ultimately decide on those matters. What we sought to do was...
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. It's going to be government policy to make sure that mothers don't have to go to work. This is what we have now got in our Constitution emphatically retained tonight.
Look,
why do you think it's being so heavily defeated?
Well, I'm not the only person in the Oireachtas who stood up against these two amendments. The 5 independent senators who weren't subject to a party whip, and brave members of the Dáil who weren't subject to the major parties' whips, joined in articulating the reasons why this referendum should be rejected. And if you want to know the reason, it's because the Irish people looked at 2 dud proposals which would not merely have produced very little positive effect but could have serious negative effects, and they in their wisdom rejected this, and I welcome that fact.
What do you think was the most persuasive reason when people were within? Some people were saying people were confused. Other people were saying people weren't confused. They just knew they didn't want these.
Well, a lot of people saw what the basis of the family referendum was, which was to detach marriage from the family and to create a chaotic system of successive and contemporaneous durable relationships, which would have caused chaos in family law and in other areas of law, including tax, social welfare, immigration, succession, and the like. And they said, I don't like the look of this. And they were utterly unconvinced by the government's explanations, which have now turned out to be very dubious. The government said that it had no implications for those areas. We now see from the Attorney General's letter, which was leaked by somebody in government, that in fact he thought it would have implications in those areas.
Yeah, and it was the ditch actually that leaked that. That was significant, wasn't it, when you read what the Attorney General believed?
It flatly contradicted what I heard said to me on radio and television by government spokespersons. It flatly contradicted what was said to the Dáil, which is a very serious matter. And it flatly contradicted what was said to the Irish people on social media. And, you know, I believe that the letter was leaked with a view to try to bolster the care referendum, and it was done deliberately for that purpose, but it backfired spectacularly.
Do you think at the end of the day, these referendums should never have been held in the first place? I mean, they started off, I suppose, from an honourable position in some way, people saying one clause in the Constitution seemed very, very archaic, you know, women in the home, and then it morphed into something completely different.
Well, I think, you know, whatever about the good intentions of the people who came up with the idea in the first place, in the reality it turned into a kind of a student union politics kind of proposal. It was misrepresented to the Irish people. Catherine Martin, for instance, constantly said that the Constitution said that women's place is in the home. That's totally untrue. The Constitution says that all citizens, men and women equally, are entitled to earn their livelihoods as they will. The Constitution merely says that where women make the choice to remain within the home parenting, that they shouldn't be forced against their wishes by economic necessity to have to work outside the home. That's all it said. But all of that was completely misrepresented to the Irish people.
Do you think there will be another attempt in another guise with different wording to try and get these referendums through?
Well, there's always a certain category of people who engage in what I call student union politics, who are kind of engaged in some kind of historical combat with an Ireland that's long since gone. But if you remember what Chief Justice Susan Denham, when she was an ordinary judge of the Supreme Court, says, she said, OK, the language is archaic, but the ideas are very important. The role of mothers in parenting is central. And the family is supposed to be the fundamental unit group of society and the basis of social order. And to say, well, we can have successive quasi-families all existing at the same time and all disputing among themselves as to their rights and to property and the like, that was crazy.